Welcome to your Daily Dose of Sunday School, episode 107. We continue to deal with the issue of the native on the island who is unable to either accept or reject the gospel because it has not come to him. We talked about from Romans 1 that even if he is not guilty of rejecting Christ, he is guilty of rejecting the Father who has given him knowledge of himself. He hasn't just made it knowledge available in creation, he has actually made that knowledge plain to him in his perception, so that what every person does, what they have to do, is to suppress that truth in order to they can't simply not see it, choose not to read it. They have to suppress it in order to keep God out of their consciousness. And so God will judge them for that, but also he will judge them for their sins. Now, some very observant person might point out, say, well, what law exactly have they broken if they don't have God's command? You can't really get me in trouble for not obeying a law that there is no way for me to know. I think R.C. Sproul gives an example of driving through a city and they've just decided to increase revenue by making green lights mean stop and red lights mean go. They did it in secret. How could you be responsible for knowing that? Well, that is not the situation at all. So we'll look at Romans 2, 12 through 16. For all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. So God doesn't need the law in order to judge sinners. Skip down a little. Verse 14, for when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves. So when Gentiles are doing what's right, that's going to happen. That act of doing what's right is going to be evidence that God has given them a law internally. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their consciences also bear witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. So they have the law written in their heart. They have, maybe not as clearly as if it was written down, but they have knowledge of what God requires, generally speaking. And some talks about their conflicting thoughts. Sometimes they are proud of their behavior, even without a command, a direct, like verbal command written down from God. They're proud of their behavior. They feel like they're a good person. They show that they're a law. Well, what happens? They're not always doing what's right. So they have a sin debt against God. They have rebelled against God. They prove that when they're proud of themselves. When they're ashamed of themselves, well, obviously they know they violated the law, even if they don't quite understand that there's a law inside them. They are testifying that there is a law that they are violating. And also, because we all are going to compare ourselves to others, complain about others. Unfortunately, when we do that, we also testify that we know there is a law. The native on the island, he's going to look down on, say, at least I'm not like that native on the island, and they're going to show that they know there is a law that all people will be judged by. Now, it's helpful to keep in mind, as far as the native, that even though there is hell is eternal, there are degrees of punishment. Not everyone will be punished the same. You don't have to imagine that the native who didn't hear the gospel is going to be and tried to live a decent enough life and be kind to his neighbors, that he's going to be judged the same as Hitler, who knew the gospel almost certainly and tried to live as bad a life as possible. We don't have to imagine that they're going to be judged the same. No, far from it. So this is Matthew 11. There's the words of Jesus, verse 20. Then he began to denounce the cities that were cities where most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. He said, "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you." So Jesus was there in those cities, and the truth was right before them in their eyes, and they were rejecting it. And Jesus said that these cities that had been destroyed by God's special judgment in the past, that on the day of judgment, that'll be more bearable for them, because they did not have a lot of truth to go on. They didn't have the very Son of God in their midst. They didn't have the gospel. So it's a good warning to whoever can hear this message. There is greater judgment for those who reject greater truth, and the judgment is less severe on those who have had less opportunity.